Hello, everybody. It's Neil Mackinnon here, and welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing Jenny Rogers. Throughout a career spanning roles as a teacher, BBC television producer, executive coach, and prolific author, Jenny has never been afraid of getting things wrong. She believes in the vital importance of experimentation and of embracing our mistakes in order to benefit from a lifetime of learning experiences that make us better coaches and ground us in our humanity. Jenny flies the flag for a whole life perspective in coaching, eschewing narrow approaches in favour of a style that acknowledges the way our personal lives and working lives are inextricably intertwined and makes room for all the parts of us. A deep interest in psychotherapy has enriched Jenny's coaching practice, and she highlights the modalities that fascinate her the most, as well as the key therapeutic ideas and techniques that are readily transferrable to any coaching practice. Jenny also discusses her latest books, which address important questions about navigating boundaries as a new coach, and working through the challenges many women face in midlife. This episode is full of sage advice drawn from a wonderfully diverse, rich career in coaching and creativity, shared by a practitioner whose dauntless spirit of curiosity and passion for understanding human relationships is as infectious as it is inspiring. We get the opportunity to talk about the relationship between trauma-aware coaching and psychodynamic therapy, nurturing a healthy writing practice and overcoming creative blocks, how we accumulate rigid ways of thinking and why it's hard to make change on your own, the art of embodying a place of non-judgment and offering challenge with compassion, and much, much more. It was a real honour to spend this time with one of the UK's most experienced executive coaches, and I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation as much as I did having it. Jenny Rogers, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I am so pleased that you've managed to carve out the time to join me, and I am somewhat giddy with excitement at the opportunity to have this time with you and ask a bunch of the questions that I've been saving up over the weeks since you agreed to come on. You've had quite a storied career, not least in your journey into coaching. So I wonder if that might be a place where we start, and perhaps a summary from you of what happened in your pre-coaching life.
Okay, well, what happened in my pre-coaching life is very consistent with what's happened in my coaching life, really. Even though people often say, how on earth did you ever get into coaching? Because you did this and you did that. But actually, the golden thread, and this is something, by the way, that in the career coaching I do, I try to help clients identify. The golden thread really has been development, teaching in all its forms, including making TV programs. So I began as a teacher in a college of FE. I then migrated to the BBC in a kind of consultative part. Well, nobody used the word consultant then, but that's what it was really, on education, to the education departments, which then existed in the BBC and sadly don't anymore. Then wheedled my way into a producer role. Stayed in that for quite a while, but it was called continuing education, the department. Not that we ever labelled our programs that, but they had an educational purpose. And what I think is interesting is the reason I mentioned that department doesn't exist anymore. And I think the reason it didn't is that we were too successful. That we pioneered programs which have now been taken over by other broadcasters. So-called lifestyle programs, for instance, I and a group of other producers persisted in making the case for programs on how to cook, on how to decorate your house, how to do DIY, do your garden, health, how to live a more healthy life. We really pioneered all those programs. Some of them have channels of their own, of course. um, and I got, this is awful to say because it sounds like such a privileged and joyful and glamorous, apparently, job, but I got terribly bored with it. And when there was a conversation with my boss, where I put up a proposal for a, a cookery program about fish. And he called me to his office. Oh, Jenny, I'd like you to produce this. And out of my mouth, I heard the words come out. No way, I can't do that. Please, please ask somebody else to do it, which he did. And really, that was a red light to me. It was time really to move on.
Okay. Because
Um,
as I understand it, you'd been involved in the programs that platformed Delia Smith and Madar Jaffrey.
yes, that's right. Delia's TV career she'd been doing little, I say that advisedly because they were done in the studio that then did the weather forecast, may still be for all I know. Nothing had happened. Her career had gone into limbo. And I had seen her, I'd auditioned her, in fact, for another role, which she didn't get. But I never forgot her because I thought she has this simplicity about how she speaks and what she conveys is, if I can do this, anybody can. And I dreamed up the idea of having, really, it was very bit brassy of me, really, 30 programs, which were really about how to cook from scratch. And I remember Delia, and by chance, her agent, Deborah Owen, sent me more or less the identical proposal. It had been turned down, then interestingly, it had been turned down by many other departments. And they come to us as education, not sexy, not mainstream, really out of despair. And hit gold with me because I had already put the same proposal to the controller of BBC Two. And so that was how it got made. So I worked on dealing with the first of those 3 series and commissioned and edited the first of those books, which went on to sell 6 million copies. Guy in BBC Books, I remember this august gentleman, and I said, I want you to publish, we're doing the series anyway, and I want you to publish a compendium. So each series will have its own title. And then you publish them as a big book at the end. And he stared at me and said, doesn't everybody know how to cook? But I think he meant that his lovely wife, who he often mentioned, knew how to cook. I'm quite sure he did. And he reluctantly agreed because I'd commissioned other books that had sold well. And that first volume sold out in 3 days.
Wow.
Because in those days you could do what you're not allowed to do now. You could hold up the book, which was just a dummy of the cover, say, buy me, buy me. So that was what Delia did.
Yeah.
And yeah, but it got to the point where I really didn't want to do that anymore. So I left and I became a commissioning editor in a multimedia startup company. I did that for 3 years. And then, to my amazement, went back to the BBC. And I ran one of the learning and development departments there. And so while I was there, senior people, you've got to bear in mind, this is a long time ago, Neil. The whole idea of management and leadership being a thing of its own was still relatively new, particularly in the BBC, where it was thought if you were an editorial genius, everything was fine. But of course it wasn't. And people began having struggles, realizing they were struggling.
Mm.
And they began making secret phone calls to me. Can I come and talk to you? I've got this problem. There's nobody else I can speak to. And I didn't know that was coaching. Of course, that was what it was.
Yeah. So an early interest albeit from a somewhat different angle, in platforming ways that adults can engage in learning and participation in their
Yeah,
own
yeah,
development.
that's right. That's right. I see the heart of coaching really as being about learning, which makes it, I'm sure we'll get to the interesting topic of coaching and therapy, but I think it makes it really quite different from therapy at its emphasis, because therapy, one way or another, is about cure, and people who are therapists still talk about giving a treatment. We don't talk about giving a coaching session. Well, maybe some coaches do, but most of the coaches I know don't. And I think we probably see what we do as being about learning.
Mm.
But maybe I'm just reflecting my own obsession. So I've always been interested in what is it, when as adults, what is it that drives us? What is this enchantment really that I experience about learning something new? And that's how I see coaching. So more and more people began coming to me in that BBC role. And in the end, I thought I've had by then found out there was this thing called coaching, and there was this thing called executive coaching. I encountered somebody who described himself as that, and I thought, oh, that's okay. That's what I do. My boss sent me on a wonderful course in Columbia, New York. But for the first time, I met 39 other people doing something very similar. I thought, right, this is it. I've got to leave the BBC. I've had enough of the BBC forever. Um, so my first year, all my clients came from the BBC, and set up my own business, and that was it.
So you managed to leave the BBC twice.
I did, without any money. I'm maybe the only person in the BBC's history who's left without payoff. Yeah, I just resigned. With a lot of people telling me I was crazy.
Mm.
Why didn't I stay? You stay. And even if your job is made redundant, you get the payoff, and you do this, and what about your pension? I really don't care about that.
Mm.
I just, my drive was elsewhere.
And so what was the drive? What were you following that tipped the scales into letting go of the secure job and the possibility in time of a substantial pension?
Well, I think it's a very good question. And a lot of coaches ask that question. And I think it's partly a life stage question. I think if you're at the point in your life where you have a degree of not maybe perfect financial security, but you have some,
Mm.
or maybe you have a partner who's earning and it may not be so important for you to be contributing, or maybe your mortgage has diminished,
Mm.
or maybe your children don't need quite so much active parenting. And it feels I think once you realize that, it feels very liberating to think, well, actually, I do not have to be on this so-called career escalator, which of course doesn't exist anymore anyway. I mean, it didn't really exist then, but we all believed that it did. Um, and so I suppose really I don't think I'm a natural entrepreneur. I don't think it was about that at all. I think it was about being able to devote myself to coaching full time.
Mm.
And really got learning as I have ever since. It's an absolutely never finished journey, what it is and how to make it work. I just became fascinated by the whole thing of what it was, how to make it work, how you worked with people, what it really was. When you did work with people that had appeared to be successful, what was it you were doing? I wanted to capture that. I
Mm.
just became completely obsessed by learning how to make it work.
And in that period, when it sounds like coaching was still relatively nascent in
It was.
its
Yeah, it was.
presence, and that you went to New York to study, how would you describe the practice back then? What were you doing?
What was happening in coaching, you mean? Or
Yeah, what were you doing in coaching conversations?
Well, I think the essence was very much what I'm doing now. So bear in mind, there was no training, there was no supervision, there were no books. There were books on something called mentoring, which probably was coaching, really. And I read those, but that was the only guidance. There was nothing else. And that course in New York was really what it was positioned as being about organizational development, which was also in its infancy.
Mm.
But there were a lot of people, an awful lot of people there who were in fact doing coaching and calling it coaching. And I think what I realized was that they were sharing a philosophy of what it was really about, which, again, I'd just fallen on, really, that it had to be a whole life perspective. It couldn't ever just be about work. So I'd never heard I mean, you'll know what I mean, Neil, by the hats theory. If you're supposed to be teaching a client something or mentoring, you say, "Oh, I'm going to take my coaching hat off now," or "I'm going to take my coaching hat off, and I'm going to ask you about your personal life." I'd never, fortunately, never heard that, and I didn't do any hat taking off. I just assumed right from the start that it was important to know what else was going on in people's lives because they brought that life to work and they took it home with them at the end of the day. So why wouldn't you ask about personal life? So it was a shock to me when coaching, there began to be training. Other people began to, particularly from sport, began to get into coaching, and they were doing things called, in quotes, performance coaching. And, oh, well, this is not therapy. It was all about coaching, wasn't. It's not this, it's not that, it's not. We are concentrated just on performance at work. Somebody asked me once to write a chapter with one of those, I think, very boring edited books on coaching with different authors, which never hang together properly. Would I write a chapter on performance coaching? And I had to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Well, everything I do is performance coaching, but I don't see it as something special. It's all about performance. And what is sense? And I think I've answered your question. It was, I think, in terms of the coaching market, the difference really was people did not know what coaching was. So people had sometimes a degree of suspicion that it meant somebody thought they were failing, and that your role as their coach was maybe to put them right without anybody telling them. And so, of course, some commissioners thought that too, that you were outsourcing a performance problem, a management problem to the coach, really right from the beginning. But that is such a striking difference today when you have FTSE 100 companies where all the most senior people have a coach, and if you don't have one, it's regarded as really quite weird.
Yeah.
So it's associated as a reward for high performance, not as a corrective to something that may be wrong that nobody can talk about and all has to be a shameful secret.
Yeah. And thinking back to the actual practice in the room of how you were attending to the whole client and the whole person, I wonder how you started out and what you might have been doing differently then in comparison to the coach that you've grown into.
Oh, well, okay. I think the main difference now is I've become much bolder about exploring early life with a client.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly because there's been so much more research and work and writing and thinking about the impact of early life on all of us. And the whole trauma field in its very absolutely broadest sense, I think, has brought very helpful enlightenment. So I think that's the main difference, which isn't that enormous, really, but there's been a shift in my attitude in the sense I'm more confident now about knowing what to ask, where to look. We've done more training with therapists, to understand their world and learn from what they do to give it a coaching slant. But I think this essential thing about asking good questions, about keeping yourself out of the way, doing a lot of listening, a lot of the whole non-judgmental thing. I should say, by the way, that with my commissioning ed role, I was commissioning a lot of management, counseling, and therapy materials, which is a wonderful way to learn about the craft of the people who are writing those books. So I already knew from them about the importance of asking open questions and what was the difference between a powerful question and a question that just got in the way.
Yeah. And so, and I do want to come at some point to this boundary between coaching and therapy. And I have some awareness from some of the writing that you've done, the importance of a psychodynamic approach and also trauma-aware coaching, which I definitely want to get to. In those early years post BBC, where you had a client base that was primarily from the organization that you'd just left, what did your practice look like in terms of where you met people, how many people you were seeing, what sort of programs you were running?
Well, I think that's a way it was very different from how it is now, because there was very little competition, and I already had very good contacts at the BBC through that role, because it was a learning and development role, and I also had my whole track record as a producer, so I was acceptable to, in quotes, creative people because of that. They knew they didn't have to explain how weird the BBC was, because I already knew that. So right from the start, and I think this is very, very unlike how it is today, I was extremely busy. I had more clients really than I could deal with. I was doing 3 2-hour sessions 5 days a week.
Wow.
Yes, I would not advise anybody to do that. It was too much, but it was enchanting. I was learning so much. So that, and I met people. I hired rooms in an office in Holborn, and I met people there, which is unlike what I do now. I see people. I'm talking to you now from my apartment. What you can't see is the mezzanine, which is my coaching area, is upstairs. And my cat is asleep on the chair in the background, and he likes to be part of the session. So he had a fit of the zoomies the other day with a client, and I had to say, I hope you don't mind this. Well, it didn't matter whether the client minded or not, because the cat was going to do the zoomies regardless.
What are the zoomies?
Zoomies is, well, it's where they go slightly crazy. Huh. It's thought to be, they typically have it early morning and at dusk, and it's thought to be because in the wild, that's when their prey are sleepy and easier to catch. It lasts about half an hour. And yeah, I assume you don't have a cat. You wouldn't be asking if you do.
Yeah.
No. They just go completely bonkers. So they'll chase imaginary mice and run around, and sometimes meowing, swishing their tails. It's very distracting for a client. But that's it. People have to put up with that. Now, I would have been very shocked by that when I was just starting out, because I had this idea you had to be tremendously professional. So it's days when women wore formal clothing, so I would wear a jacket. So I see people now just as I am today. So it's a sweatshirt, and you can't see the sweatpants, but that's I don't wear jeans for work, but otherwise, I just as I normally do. So it was a touch more formal.
Hmm.
But in every other way, I have the same PA, Angie, that was working with me then, who started off as a neighbour, and she has stuck with me through thick and thin. There's
Yeah.
been quite a lot of thin, one way or another.
Well, from this context of meeting up to 3 people a day for 2-hour sessions, 5 days a week.
Madness! Don't do it,
Okay,
coaches. Don't.
I mean, as happy as I am that my practice is doing okay, I certainly don't have that volume of client flow. So I'm not in any danger of doing that many sessions in the near future. What like how did things shift from there? Was it that you recognized the weight and the challenge of seeing that many people for that long became untenable? What made
Yes,
you shift?
well, it did, and this is where my late husband Alan came in, because he also had worked at the BBC and he got fed up with it for different reasons. He was very piratical, perhaps is a better word than entrepreneurial, but and he was keen to grow a business, and so he persuaded me that the thing to do, I was a limited company from the start, and that we should have associates, and that I should not be working so hard. And I was glad to have that, dubious at first, but glad to have that help and somebody to say, well, I can, this is him talking, I can look after that admin side of it. With Angie then was working with us both, and attracting associates and staff, and eventually moving into premises of our own. Um,
And was
uh,
this the birth of Management Futures?
yes, it was. Yes, that's right. Now, sadly, I mean, it got to the point. Alan's health deteriorated. It got to the point where I felt that there was no gap between work and home. I couldn't do it anymore, really. So I left the payroll.
Mm. Mm.
And that coincided with the recession of 2008. A lot of the work was public sector work, and it just wasn't sustainable. Alan's health was declining, and he died in 2010.
Mm.
And without him really to make it work, it couldn't work. So I always just had to stand on the sidelines watching that, which wasn't pleasant. Uh,
Mm.
as well as dealing then with bereavement and the aftermath of everything that followed.
Yeah.
So, so from probably 2007, I was back on my own.
Mm. I want to touch into something there, and thank you for sharing really openly about some of the things that were going on. And I'm conscious from having read um, several of your books, and most recently reading, or I'll be honest, listening to the beautifully recorded audio version of Are You
Mm.
Listening?
Mm.
How open you are about the things that have shaped you, and about some of the experiences that you've had
Mm.
in both life and business.
Yeah, sure. Mm.
And I suppose, to what extent have these incredibly powerful and, one imagines, challenging experiences shaped the coach that you've become?
Oh, completely, completely. I wanted to thank you for those comments on Are You Listening, and to the actor who read it. So a lot of them be such a nice way. A lot of people I've had some comments about, well, I do my ironing while listening to your. Okay, well, that's great. Thank you. Um, but writing that book, it was very important to me to write that book, because what I wanted to convey was that coaching doesn't always work, number
Mm.
one. And secondly, that it's completely wrong to think of yourself as some kind of Freudian blank mirror. And not that Freud was ever a blank mirror himself, of course. What he advocated for other people, he never did himself. But that you weren't the client is not a patient lying on a couch where you're not doing eye contact because I'm sounding critical of this. I'm not really. I think it's quite fascinating that that can work, but that could never work for me. That it is about a human exchange, and that I wanted to write that book because I wanted to convey how often the client has an impact on the coach, as well as the coach having an impact on the client. And that very often there are spooky parallels, which you've heard in some of those stories between what is happening to the client and, unknown to them, the impact that they are having on you. And I've seen that in the volunteer work I did for 10 years as a coach with a charity. Exactly the same thing. I mean, I'm just as one funny example. I was coaching a woman who was originally from West Africa. She was unemployed. She was looking for a job, and the job she was going for was as a school cook. And I didn't follow the conventional route. We only had an hour with these women. What I was supposed to do was prepare her for her interview. Instead, I said, "So you're going for a job as a cook? You must know about jollof rice, and you come from Ghana." And she said, her whole face broke into a smile. She said, "Yes. Now let me tell you about my secret family recipe for jollof rice. Don't let any Nigerian tell you their recipe is better." And we more or less spent the whole session talking about food. And what she was doing at one point was standing in a small room, nice room, dedicated to coaching, standing up, demonstrating with invisible ingredients and equipment how you do this. And it was completely new to me. I mean, I'm a very experienced cook and I love cooking. I had never heard of this technique that she was describing. And on my way home, I bought some rice and bought the peppers, and I bought the Scotch bonnet, and Scotch bonnet, beware. And I have one of my sons coming for supper that night. Oh, here's my cat. Baby, come on my lap, please. And made this amazing jollof rice. I thought, this is a very good example. I knew she'd get the job. We didn't do any interview coaching, really. I said, all you have to do is be the person you've been with me today. Now, of course, she did get the job. I mean, they were really, really lucky to have her.
Yeah.
And so really that book was as much about mistakes, about getting it wrong, about unexpected benefits, about sometimes the reluctance of the client to engage with you, and yet the coaching still works. And when I showed a draft of one or two of the chapters to a friend, including the one about the doctor, which had a very sad ending, she said to me, "Jenny, you'll ruin your reputation with this book. You really shouldn't publish it." But this is the very reason I want to publish it. You know, coaches are not miracle workers. You know, of course we're going to get it wrong. How could we not? It's one human working with another.
Yeah, and I hear both in your story of your experience with the Ghanaian woman and her preparation for an interview as a cook, and almost working through the metaphor of something she was already confident in that was entirely related to the practice.
Well, that sounds interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, so I have some sense that through her connecting with you in a way that was authentic to something she deeply understood and embodied as a cook of jollof rice, that I imagine has a significance to her in the way that she learned about it and how she's provided that for other people that she cares about, and
Mm.
perhaps the confidence that that supports generating in relation to
Mm.
connecting with you for the purpose of
Yes,
going
well,
to
that's exactly that is how I justified it to myself
Mm,
as I was walking home. Um, I was absolutely certain she would get the job
mm,
because I thought what she would convey was that she was very confident about cooking
mm, yeah.
and that she's got small children herself, and she would be able to. The school wanted cooking from scratch. Wasn't going to be just something delivered in hot trays. It was all going to be made from scratch. I thought they couldn't ask for a better fit. This
Mm,
woman is perfect.
mm,
But we didn't do any of that well, though. If they ask you this question, this is maybe, how would you respond, and what are your concerns about the interview? We did a little bit of that, but not much.
mm. And
Uh,
I come back to one of the other stories in Are You Listening around the and I forget the name you gave to this individual, but their experience of exploring what was going on for them professionally and the challenges you had with connecting with them initially until they experienced your cat, and now your cat's in the mix,
oh,
and
right, yes, the final one, yes,
kind of
yes. Time spent with the cat is never wasted.
yes.
Allegedly, a quote from Chanel. Yes, um, yeah, that's right. That was odd, and I think often things happen you can't explain.
Mm, mm. And I have a sense, and I'd love to hear your experience of it, that far from that book being a challenge to the success of your career, I imagine it probably did quite the opposite. And
Yes, yeah, I think it did. It brought me a lot of interesting ones.
mm,
Um,
mm,
I read your book, and I'm not sure what I want to get out of it, but can I talk to you about you being my coach? And yeah, it brought me several very interesting people that I'm still in touch with, in fact. So yeah,
mm,
did I and if it did my reputation harm, well, so be it. I can't pose as the all perfect, all knowing coach because I'm not,
mm,
nor is anybody.
mm. Yeah. If we jump back to the period post management futures and you're setting out your stall again as
Mm.
an independent, what was the process there, having learned all the things through building management futures, through these really powerful life experiences of losing your husband and the company winding down?
Mm.
How did you choose to begin again business wise?
I don't know that I did. Well, of course, I must have consciously chosen at some point in the sense of actually saying the words out loud. I can't be employed here anymore. Um, but again, it was a bit like leaving the BBC. It just felt like something that had to happen. I think I was just confident that this is germane to many coaches listening to this who are wondering how they can expand their practice.
Mm,
It's all word of mouth. It's all really about doing the work that interests you. If you're doing work that interests you, you're likely to do it well. If you do it well, clients will recommend you to other clients, sometimes 3 or 4 removed, so you won't know how a client has found their way to you, but they will have through some chain of recommendation. So I think I was just confident that I had enough, as it were, to use the jargon, sales in the pipeline, that would generate enough work to start me off without competing with my old company, and that I could concentrate on the sectors that I knew and on the work that I enjoyed doing, and that I would just make that clear to people really through when people made inquiries. Well, I would be willing to say, I don't really think I'm the right person for you. but I can suggest somebody who is. And then I probably said, I am starting up again. If you found this valuable, please recommend me to other people because I'm open for business.
Mm.
So I think it just evolved organically, really. I don't think I had any grand plan. Just probably not the right thing to say to other coaches, but it is all word of mouth, and I think the foundation is you really have to do the best work you possibly can, and you must have supervision. Must have somebody who can talk to you about your practice, and if it's a supervisor who can talk to you about the business development part of it, that is even better.
So, touching on supervision, what was your way of finding a supervisor initially that was a fit
Well,
for you?
again, it's word of mouth again. And my first supervisor at that time, still a really dear friend, is Julia Vaughan Smith. You know Julia,
I know her book.
coaching and trauma. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. When I commissioned that book, I was absolutely determined I would get another book out of her. I'd already got one, um, and she was my first supervisor. Now, because that's a very interesting story of how mixed these relationships can be. Because I'd already known Jules for probably 10 years at that point. And so we knew each other first as colleagues. We were co-facilitators. I had been her coach. I had already been her editor once. She completed her psychotherapy degree during that time. So she's very unusual because she's a fully trained, fully practiced executive coach, as well as being a fully trained practicing psychotherapist. So yeah, she was my first supervisor, and then she decided she would move to Devon. Of course, then it was assumed if people weren't in London, you couldn't. Zoom wasn't a possibility. So I think she recommended somebody else, which didn't work out brilliantly. And then, yeah, what I do now is I'm in a co-supervision relationship with somebody I initially trained. That was probably 15 years ago, more, maybe 16 years ago, who is a former GP. And we meet in each other's homes, or sometimes we just go for a walk. So I live on the Regent's Canal, so sometimes we walk up and down the towpath here, or walk in one of her local parks. We have a nice lunch, and we do maybe an hour and a half of supervision each, which works very well. The last one we did at Tate Modern.
Using the surroundings as part of the
Yes.
session.
Well, we had lunch first, and then we went to the exhibition, then we went back to the cafe. So we're both interested in textile art, so that's another bonus. And this exhibition had textile content, so yeah, played into it. I recommend it.
And you've spoken there about your work in training, in terms of training other coaches, and
Yes.
also your work as a facilitator. When did that begin?
Oh, right. Very, very early. This is another thing. If I'm learning something new and I feel I've got some degree of mastery over it, I want to tell other people about it, either by training them or writing about it, or both. So really right from almost from the beginning, because there was no training and I was having to synthesize stuff I was getting, well, of course, in Colombia, books on counseling, books on this, books on that. And I began to think, well, I'm beginning to get a body of awareness here about what you need to do to be a coach. And people began approaching us saying, do you do training? And I thought, well, we don't, but we might. So let's get a group of people together and run a pilot and see if it works. And writing the handouts for that course led to the first edition of my coaching skills book, because I thought, okay, these handouts are all way well as far as they go, but they're a bit cryptic. So probably this could be a book. And it was.
And how many books have you written?
Oh, do you know, I don't know. I guess it's an awful thing to say, isn't it? I don't know. It depends how you define book. Lots of pamphletty kind of books. About 40, I should think, probably altogether.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anything that interests me, I think, oh, that could be a book in that, including cookery books.
Yeah.
So,
And what is your practice as regards writing?
what do you mean? Which part? I could go on for hours about that, but which bit of it
Well,
interests you?
so I noticed, for example, with your book on coaching skills, which I think is now in its fourth or fifth
Fifth edition,
fifth
yes.
edition. I'm sort of looking. I have a couple of your books here on my desk from some reading this morning. I hear that came as a result of collating material for a course that you were teaching. Um, is that standard practice? One of the other ones that I've got sitting here is how I, in fact, first met you building a coaching business, which I'll say more about in a moment, which I imagine, at least as it reads, I'm struck by the balance of theoretical rigor and clear articulation, but a strong sense that the person that's written this book has lived this practice.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, what's your question? You started asking a question.
I did, and it wasn't well formed, so let me have another run at it. I'll try and make it an open one as well to be a well-behaved coach. So if we were to take your book on coaching skills, which is, I imagine, still probably the most widely read, when you began to get a sense that this collection of materials connected to the course was going to be a book, practically, what did you do to move from a set of course materials to generate something that ultimately hung together as a really quite substantial book?
Yeah. Well, this isn't the answer to your question, but I would say that if you look at the first edition, it looks quite skinny compared with the fifth edition. So I've had to persuade my editors every time. Look, I'm really sorry about this, but this is 125,000 words. Is that okay? And I think the first edition probably was about 90, perhaps. So each edition has, in effect, I've been rewriting the book. There are things that are the same and recognizable, but edition 1, edition 5 look like two different books. But you're right that what I aim to do is keep a personal voice while backing it up with evidence. Now, the actual honest answer to your question is that I can't help myself.
Huh.
That really, as a very small child, I was writing. And I've always been a compulsive writer. I discovered after my dad died, I discovered a cache of his journals that I had some of them, but I didn't have this one. And he wrote on my 8th birthday, Jennifer has announced that she's going to be a poet when she grows up. I was doing it even then. I was. I really, right through childhood, one of my earliest memories was of writing a heavily plagiarized book about a mouse. I can see it now, raggedy paper, 4 pages, that I folded in half and gave to my mother, commanding her to stitch it up for me, which she did, stitched through the middle. That was my first book. So if I'm not writing, I'm not happy. I've just finished a book now, and I'm not happy because I haven't got another one.
And what's the need that it's meeting?
Do you know, I really don't know. Um, if I feel stuck with a book, this is the answer to your question, but if I feel stuck, there's a thing called the New River Path, quite near where I live, and it's actually what do you call it, an aquifer. It brought clean water 50 miles from Hertford to London in the early 17th century. And now it's just this bit of it, the local bit, is really just a long pond, but it is where the New River went, and it's been beautifully planted. And so if I feel stuck, I can be there in about 10 minutes. I can walk on it, and I can feel a paragraph forming in my head. And then I have to get home because I want to write it down before I forget it. My books write themselves. They don't. I mean, they of course they don't. But an idea will come to me. I think, okay, I wonder if I could make something. Could be a blog. The blog might grow into something else, or see. I don't know. I think a lot of people who share this compulsion would probably say the same. It's just something that has to happen.
And I wonder on the parallels with making meaning from fragments and ideas and the practice of coaching and supporting others. And I'm fascinated by I'm fascinated by the process of creation and how people do it in different ways, but also a noticing that there are a great many coaches that have a creative practice and are it's frequently a compulsion. That it's not a nice to have hobby, but rather something that
no, that's right. It isn't. It definitely isn't. It definitely isn't a hobby, and I don't think it depends on whether you get published or not. Well, it probably does to some extent. You want at least one reader. But as soon as a book is published, I'm really on to the next thing, and I have to corral myself to focus on correcting proofs, or all the PR, all the things that have to happen after you've delivered the manuscript. They feel tedious to me because I want to be writing something else. But I think you're right. I think it's an interesting thing how many coaches have some other creative practice in their lives. So I'm now spending quite a lot of my time on textile art, and I'm doing a lot of learning with some very talented people. And it's a bit the same there. I have to have something on the go. While I was waiting to join you today, I was just looking at something I was working on last night. I'm going to see it out of the corner of my eye now, thinking, I'm not sure I'm completely happy with that. I wonder, could I change the background a little bit and found some thing, maybe alter that, do this. That's how it is.
And is your practice of writing typically also iterative, that there are consistent returns and reworkings?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. The first draft is just the first of many. With this book that I've just delivered to the publisher, they actually very generously gave me a proper, fully professional, amazing, talented editor to work with me. And I'm not a beginner in writing by any means, but I've learnt so much from her. And she's improved the book immeasurably. And we probably have done 12 drafts easily. Each one finer and finer edits. But if I compare the first finished thing with what we submitted, it'd be very different. And it's enjoyable, the whole thing, because what you're doing is is the message clear? Is the writing as clear as it can be? So one of the things I do is an adjective and adverb check, and eliminating any that are unnecessary. Eliminate all modifiers and intensifiers like very or rather, which can creep into what you write so easily.
And what purpose does the elimination of those serve?
Oh, it just makes the text clearer. It's much easier to read. You don't need very or rather or much or more. It's the rule. Except very occasionally you do need it.
Yeah. And again, I'm at risk of paralleling everything with coaching, but I recognize to some extent coaching can be seen as supporting people to be in clearer communication with parts of themselves. There may be.
I've never thought of that, but you're absolutely right. It is. It is.
Yeah.
Hi everybody, Robbie here. I'm the creator of The Coach's Journey. If you like what you're hearing on this episode, the chances are you'll love An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel. That's a free ebook available at thecoachesjourney.com. It's the most important piece of content I've ever created for coaches, boiling down everything I've learned from this show, from working with master coaches, and from my own experience into one simple model. The model not only tells you the only things you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business, but also shows you how they can form a virtuous circle that keeps your coaching business growing. It's all free, and you can find it at thecoachesjourney.com. And there's a link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
I want to touch in on a couple of things as regards the practice of coaching, and it's some jumping off points from things I've read. And one of the things I was struck by was in the introduction to Are You Listening around coaching and change, and this statement that I've read and heard various other places: no change, no coaching. And you being really clear that change is difficult and it's complex and oftentimes slow and messy. And I wonder if you might speak to what sits behind that statement.
Well, so many things. It's a bit difficult to know where to begin with it. I think the thing I say in that intro, either there or perhaps I've said in many other places in different ways, is that the bigger the change, the more we want it, the more difficult it can be to make. So I'll wish to make the change and have something better rubs against mental and physical habits of many years and against our early conditioning, where we, regardless of how wonderful or awful our parents were, we learn particular ways to survive, which is probably a very dramatic way of putting it, but how to look after ourselves, sometimes in environments that don't really help that very much, but even where they do help, we accumulate fairly rigid ways of thinking. And we put invisible barriers in front of ourselves, which we don't always recognize. So I think the process of change is hard for that reason. That we can agree, for instance, if you take people who are overweight, they know perfectly well that they shouldn't be as overweight as they are. And they know all the standard advice. They've probably tried all the standard advice. It still doesn't work. And I did 2 years, part of my practice, I did do weight loss coaching. And some of my clients were women doctors who again knew perfectly well what they were doing to their metabolism and general health by being so overweight. But they were not able to stop on their own. So I think this is where having a thinking companion who's on your side and who suspends judgment, doesn't do what the rest of the world does. So stay with the fatness example, who doesn't judge you, who doesn't hiss, who doesn't tell you you're taking up too much space on the seats on the bus or on the plane, says you should have booked 2 seats. Or give you platitudinous advice about what worked for me is this. I think you should do this. Or surely you know how awful it is for you to be so overweight, etc., etc. To have somebody who doesn't do any of that and is prepared to listen to you and listen to what you're not saying as well as what you are saying, and who can help you investigate where your actual ideas about what you think you're capable of doing, where they came from, and how much attention to pay to them right now. That is such a gift, and it's so rare, so unusual.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine. Everybody, most people could intellectualize their problems and could tell you why something is hard. They can tell you why something is desirable, and they can also tell you why they're not doing it yet. So, and something like being morbidly obese, for instance, is literally life-threatening, and smoking, all these things that we know are not good for us, people still do. And so, what explains it? And so that's territory for coaching and for therapy, of course.
And so how do you think about the balance between being trauma aware, being conscious? I consistently use in some of the work that I do a phrase that I think I've literally stolen from Julia Von Smith around how the client's there and then shows up in their here and now, which I find enormously powerful.
Yes, it is.
With all this in the mix, and I'm also thinking to her inclusion of Franz Ruppert's model around how people end up in their survival body. How do you think about staying safely in an executive coaching space and not overstepping that boundary into a therapeutic space?
Well, I don't think there is a boundary in the sense you may be implying. You can tell me whether I'm implying something you don't mean here. I don't think there is any so-called firewall. An American colleague once to say, "Oh, well, I teach all my students about the firewall with therapy," and I said, "What firewall?" I don't think there is any accepted boundary with therapy. That's coaches don't always want to hear that. They would rather, in their early days, know there really is some boundary. So if you think about yourself in this and where your own journey has taken you, you probably will realize how that has moved with time and awareness and confidence. So with very absolute beginner coaches, they will frequently assume if somebody cries in a session, it means they need therapy. And I remember years and years ago, somebody who she isn't in coaching in any coach training in any live way now, but very woman I really respect. Having supper with her, this probably looking back 20 years, where she said to me very seriously, "Emotion has no place in the coaching room, Jenny."
Wow.
Well, you can laugh, but she, in the coaching she sponsored, that remained the philosophy until really relatively recently. And they described what they did as business coaching. So how absurd. Like people who say in management context, well, people should leave their personal lives at home. Personal life has no place in a work context. What? How can that be true? So if you think about how an absolute rank beginner thinks about that boundary with therapy, they think, and these are not unsophisticated people. They think if somebody cries, it means they need therapy. If somebody mentions a problem they have with a personal partner, a husband-wife personal partner, it means they need relationship counselling. And then the boundary moves back a little bit where you realize it doesn't mean that they need therapy or relationship counselling, or they might, but there's perfectly safe territory that you can explore without thinking of yourself as a therapist. And so there's this thing about, then can I do harm? Well, no, if you stick to coaching questions and to coaching philosophy, you can't. You can be boring, you can be incompetent, be absolutely useless, but can you do harm? Well, maybe no. So as you get more experienced and as you become more comfortable with the emotional landscape and with the backstory that a client brings you, that boundary with therapy begins to dissolve, I think. And every coach will have that boundary in a different place, depending on their experience, their temperament, their courage, their confidence, how much training they've had. Quite a lot of people who have also had psychotherapeutic training, or they've done some counseling training. And more psychotherapists are also coming into coaching. So the boundaries are blurring, I think, all the time. But I think my main point here is it will be a personal boundary. There is no actual boundary. But anybody could agree and say, oh, well, it's there.
Yes. And I think any impression I gave or inferred that there is an external boundary is I'm right, absolutely right to be called on. What the question it sparks for me is, to what extent, somewhat by your acknowledgement that psychotherapists are coming into coaching, of course, an enormously rigorous process of training to become a psychotherapist, to what extent do coaches need to have done their inner work in order to be able to navigate these waters?
Yes, absolutely. I would also challenge the idea that all psychotherapy training is thorough, given how incompetent some therapists seem to be, along with how incompetent some coaches seem to be. I would really query that. I think it all depends. But yeah, sorry, what was the question? I distracted myself.
Again, it may be that the question wasn't a great one. So another angle is, what work would you point coaches towards to develop the necessary emotional maturity?
Okay. Well, I don't think there is any one path, but I can tell you what has been very helpful for me. Starting with psychometric instruments. Well, probably starting with what I mentioned before, I'd commissioned books on counseling and therapy. So reading books in the way that you have to when your commissioning editor brings you face to face with what those ideas are. So some reading of some kind, I think, would be very useful. There are a lot of introductory books which are really, really helpful. Then for me, it was starting with the Myers-Briggs type indicator and realizing there were ways of looking at human personality which gave you a lens for looking at what was going on for people. That there were differences that were observable and that you could classify, and it was a typology. Going on from that to the 16 PF, still the foundation of the things like the Neo, the Hogan, none of them could have existed without Ray Cattell's brilliant work on that psychometric instrument. Going on from that to the Fire B, another brilliant psychometrician, Will Schutz, and realizing those three instruments they all look at human personality in a different way. And their ways of understanding difference and of understanding, in some cases, how those things are formed with FROB, how they're formed. Maybe the other two don't do that. Which opens up a world of difference, that what you consider to be the norm for yourself isn't. It's your personal norm, yes, but it isn't anybody else's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then realizing how much impact culture has, national culture, local culture, suburban culture, village culture. When I go to Norfolk, I'm in a completely different world from the world I'm in London. If I go to France, different again, or America, different again. So it's understanding how labile that whole world of assumptions is, and then getting some training in, get as much short-term training in therapeutic topics as you can, through reading, through talking to therapists. I book a lot of the short seminars run by N Science. So N for Nobody's Science, maybe nscience.global or something like that. Essentially, they're lectures with slides online. A series of distinguished therapists talking about how they approach their work. They choose the topics really cleverly. I think they're always intriguing and engaging. I'm often the only coach on the call. And when they were pre-pandemic, when they were doing it face to face, I never met another coach there. But
Wonderful.
they might have 200 people in the room, and I would search for another coach. Never found one. And so I think there's so much to be learnt from, and so much overlap really with the kinds of topics, even though the intention and the focus of the work might be different. There's so much to be learned from that therapy world that can benefit coaches. And then the brilliant people like Julia Vaughan-Smith, who have done that dual training and who did the Franz Rippert thing with the pie chart, as you've referred to, with the survival self, the healthy self, the traumatized self. I think Jules has done the most amazing service to the coaching world by making it accessible. And by saying we are not trauma therapists, so we are not dealing with the trauma. We are trauma aware. We are observing the trauma. We're not working on the trauma. We know how what Gabor Mate called big T and small t trauma has affected all of us one way or another. I think her main contribution to this debate is pointing out there is no traumatized population of them and us who are happily untraumatized. You can look on them with pity. We are all traumatized to some extent. The only question is to what extent and how does it affect us?
Goodness, what a rich range of ways to build awareness and become more connected to ways of being that are ultimately in service of our clients. Again, from the listening to you and reading of you that I've done, I'm conscious of what part the work of Irving Yalom plays in your coaching. I wonder if you might speak to that.
Yes, well, yes, thank you for that prompt. He has had a radical impact on me. When I read Love's Executioner, which was, I think it was published in 1982, something like that, I realized then, this goes back to, we were talking about my book, Are You Listening? And including things about making mistakes or being puzzled, not knowing quite what was going on. he was the first practitioner of any kind in any profession I had ever heard express doubts about his own competence, write about it with humor, talk about himself with humility, make jokes as writing. Have you read that book?
I haven't. I have scanned passages, but I haven't read it properly.
Okay, well, if you read the one about the fat client, it's very, very funny. I mean, I think they're too long, those stories. I'm in my kind of editor hat on. I think now I'd say, take out half this length. But anyway, how dare I? My hero. But at the end of the story, he has a conversation with the client about their relationship. And she says to him, I know perfectly well you didn't like me, but I stayed with it because I still thought you could help me. And I think the one thing that comes out of his work, in which he advocates all the time, he talks in The Gift of Therapy, which is, have you read that? That's his. Well, that would be better to start with than Love's Executioner. Actually, this is his digest of years of working. It's a letter to younger therapists. He's revised it, but it looks very much like the original edition to me. He's got one chapter, they're all short chapters, which it's called something like Develop Rabbit Ears. And what he means by that is just when a rabbit is alert, its ears go up. That we really ought to be alert, not just to what the client is saying and our amazing genius in working with them, but what is going on between you and the client. And that you should raise that. You should regularly raise that question. How are we getting on, you and me? And very often in the supervision work I do, when a coach brings me something that has seemed like an insurmountable block, that is the one question they haven't asked. And very often when you ask that question, it kind of opens up the whole thing. And he advocates doing that, and I think he's absolutely right to do that. As another way that, we were talking earlier about the olden days of coaching, and nobody would ever have asked that. I wouldn't have asked that question because I thought I had to be the perfect professional coach. That's why I was wearing the jacket and in nice offices were nice and bland and didn't reveal anything about me. Whereas that isn't what it's about. It is entirely about the relationship between you and the client.
And it makes me think of the work of Carl Rogers. And
yes, yeah, that's right.
The power, the foundational necessity of a relational field to do the work.
And the foundational necessity of suspending judgment, even when it's difficult. And you can't really do it. That you know it's the only way it can work. It can't work if, and this again goes back to the question you raised about are you listening, and my response to it, that you have to be as undefended as you expect your client to be. If you're not, if you're posing as this amazing professional coach and wearing your survival self in Franz terms, it's not that it's going to fail, but it won't be as successful as it will be if you are fully present there, suspending judgment and listening, and unafraid of getting it wrong. That's the only way I think it can work. When it works well, that's what's happening.
What part does compassion play in your practice as intent, and when, not if, you make a judgment? How do you soften into compassion?
Just say a bit more about that question and what interests you about it, so that I give me a bit of time to think about my answer.
So, my experience of some of your writing is you talk about challenge with compassion. And I have a sense from our conversation today, and again, experiencing you in other ways through writing and listening, through reading and listening, that you support the ethos that coaching needn't be a comfortable place to spend time, and yet it need be a held space where there is genuine relationship and transparency. And if we as practitioners are unable to fully embody a place of non-judgment because we are human and we are fallible and we have beliefs and judgments that are unavoidable, how you, after however many thousands of hours of coaching, think about compassion. Perhaps a better word for it is love. How you give primacy to love when you are finding yourself being judgmental.
Well, the English language has a lot of useful words around this area. And of the words you've used, I would use the one you haven't yet used, which is kindness. So compassion, I think you must feel compassion sometimes where people are sobbing in front of you because they've lost their jobs or someone they love has died. But it mustn't turn into pity. Because once it turns into pity, you are at risk of falling into that rescuer role. Oh, they need me. I'm the only person who can help them here. Oh, I'm so sorry. You fall into cliche. I'm so sorry for your loss. Oh, no, don't say that. I think kindness is something different. And if you think about how doctors have to learn to do this, they also have to learn how to do this. Somebody who's a sort of friend, but definitely has been a colleague in the past, Dr. John Lorna, he's written a book called How Not to Be a Doctor. It's based on columns he wrote in the British Medical Journal. He's got a chapter in that on kindness, and he talks about the necessity for doctors to ask, have I been kind? It's one of the 4 values of University College Hospital, which is my local hospital. And I think they have transformed what they do. It's one of the reasons they are such an amazing hospital, that you do experience kindness there, and you didn't used to. So if you're a doctor and you have to give someone bad news, you have to do it with kindness. So sometimes in coaching, we have to give people bad news if we've done a 360 survey for them, for instance, where shows a lot of people don't like the behavior that the client is doing. It's not being kind to withhold that. Kindness is saying, people did say this about you, but it's up to you how you respond. And there are other people who've said things that contradict that. So let's talk about how we square that, or let's talk about your perception of how true you think this is, and if it is true, what you do.
And it's not about being nice.
No, it's no. Well, I think you probably no. Being nice is another interesting word, isn't it? It implies something fake.
Yeah.
Being nice, it's fake polite, fake niceness, fake politeness, fake kindness. Real kindness is not fake. So it's about understand. So going back to your point about how we really have to have worked on ourselves, we really have to know what is it that might trigger these anger or dislike in me, and what does this say not about the client but about me? What might I be projecting onto the client? So that every coach needs to understand what projection is, because very often when we criticize a client, what we're talking about is ourselves. So that's where things like transactional analysis or many other kinds of therapy are so useful, because they're shortcuts to understanding us first before we can start trying to understand clients.
Yeah. And where it takes my thinking, at least, is into the area of developments in the profession and what's required of coaching nowadays, where one need only blink at the news and recognize kindness is in fairly short supply.
Yeah, that's right.
In a variety of ways. And I wonder, one of the things we've touched on, although not explicitly, is your work is in executive coaching, and as I understand it, it's largely through connections with either organizations who are sponsoring the coaching or with people who, at least initially, are bringing material that they are working on in a professional context. And I suppose I'm at risk of quoting a song by Burt Bacharach, but what does the world need now from coaching?
Well, it needs coaching. It's really, what's happening in America is so horrifying. I've become a news avoider, in fact. I'm finding it unbearable. Yes, the world needs tolerance, not slogans, and ability to listen rather than rushing to judgment, or to war. Yeah, that's why I'm a news avoider. It's not a tactic I'd recommend to other people, but otherwise, I think you fall into despair so readily. Every page. So I subscribe to the Times and to the Guardian, and I dip into the Telegraph from time to time. The pages I just scroll past. I think I can't read that. How about you?
I equally find myself oscillating between dipping in and avoiding, and uncertainty about what's useful and what part coaching can play. In some respects, I think as long as I have a sense that I am practicing in an ethically sound way, navigating situations with a measured moral compass, and hopefully supporting others to do the same without judgment and without any sense that I know best or that I have the solutions or answers. My hope is that ultimately I'm supporting more of the good stuff and perhaps gently, perhaps in somewhat of an abstract fashion, fighting the good fight against the war of command and control, or dissociate and destroy, or however one might like to coin it. And to some extent, I'm thinking about the other systemic challenges we face as a species and how I suppose your thoughts on those from your vantage point of decades of experience of supporting leaders, supporting influential people to make meaningful change.
I suppose it's quite, if we come on to talking about how you develop a coaching practice, one of my ways of squaring that circle is that I work with people I think I can respect and where there is some shared moral canvas, which means I won't be working with people who believe it's okay to destroy the environment because they want to make money. So the sectors I tend to work in, I still do a lot of work in media, professional service firms, law firms, executive search. And then there's a whole creative performing arts area as well, where people don't have a lot of money. So I've turned my face against those very high-end coaching companies that are charging very large amounts of money, working with chief execs and others in FTSE 100 companies. Because I don't want to be faced with that kind of moral dilemma. Like, is this client worth a salary of £7 million? How could any job be worth that? So that's another way in which I avoid, and I've consciously sacrificed money and income in that for that reason. There's people in public sector organizations can't afford those kinds of fees. And in my experience of working with quite a few of those people as the supervisor, the work they do is no different from the work. They all do very good work, but believe me, they do. But it's no better than the work other good coaches do. But they may be rewarded 10, 20 times, sometimes many, many more times than that. Than somebody who's working, say, with orchestral players.
And that brings me round to where I initially connected with you, which was through Guildhall Ignite and a masterclass that you were giving there on on building a coaching business. And as I understand it, are you doing some teaching there?
Yes, I do. Yes, I have for many years. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what drew you towards that organization and supporting coaches in that area?
Well, it was through a personal contact to somebody where I had done her initial training. And she had decided that she would build a coaching business based on the education sector. And through the work that she had done very successfully in creating a niche in that sector, the Guildhall was one of her clients. And she saw an opportunity there to extend the idea of coaching into coaching as an approach to teaching. So that was how all those training courses started at the Guildhall through her. And she asked me if I would join her there as a co-trainer. So, of course, I said yes, because we're still really, really good friends. I saw her only last Saturday. And so that was probably 13 years ago. And the courses, they were very successful. And the Guildhall we probably know this, is owned by the City of London Corporation. It also owns the Barbican. So we began to get staff from the City of London and from the Barbican, and then it spread out from there to be open courses for anybody, leading to EMCC qualifications. So it was ILM originally, then it became EMCC. So, but I feel very at home there because performing arts is in my blood as a former TV producer. I understand about working with creative people because that was what I did. And it was what Alan, my late husband, did as well. He ran the department that does Woman's Hour and Start the Week, Stop the Week, or their midweek, all those things, those very successful magazine programs. So he was working all the time with household names, actors, newsreaders, famous authors, and all the rest of it. And So through his work, I got to meet a lot of those people, as well as the presenters and actors and everybody else that I was working with in my own work. So I know how those people tick, really. I can see that I know the battles they have between egotism and performance, and having to please a producer or an audience when it may not be the way they really want to do that work, or whatever. Creative compromises that have to be made, and the pressure on performers is immense.
Yeah.
And I understand that. And if they become famous, it becomes even more immense.
Yeah.
There's a story in Are You Listening about somebody who did become famous and really couldn't cope with it. That's another whole area.
Yeah, absolutely. And an area I'm fascinated by through my background in the performing arts. I want to turn, as we move into perhaps towards the end of the call. You mentioned a book or two that are in the offing and very close to coming out. I wonder if you might speak a little about fearless coaching.
Okay. Well, fearless coaching is a bit like Are You Listening in the format, except that whereas Are You Listening is just meant for a general audience, fearless coaching is definitely meant for coaches. So it's for people who've got through that initial training, and they may have got a qualification or be working towards one, maybe nearly completing it. And it's the kinds of questions that you might ask at that stage, or indeed at any further stage in your coaching journey, about boundaries, really. So it's questions like, that session didn't follow a standard format, or for instance, I didn't really ever set a goal. Was that okay? Or this client was faced with a tremendously difficult business decision, and they were begging me for advice, and I had a strong opinion about what I thought they should do. I didn't give them the advice, and should I have?
Hmm.
Because as events turned out, maybe I should have. But then, if I did, would it have made a difference? Possibly it wouldn't. Most probably it wouldn't have. Was I too woo-woo? I have a story, for instance, about a client who had found a piece of writing from her father, which was very negative about her. And he had died, and she had clung to this. It was an exercise book with, I describe it as having, she handled it so much, the cover was crumbling. You remember those exercise books at school? Soft covers. And she was holding on to this, and the hurt and rage that this had created. And my suggestion to her was that we should cremate it on my balcony. I mean, what you can't see is, well, you probably can see actually, I've got balconies on both sides of my flat. So the one where this happened was the one you can't see, which is over there, which overlooks the canal. And so I suggested that at our next session, she should bring the journal and we would ceremonially cremate it, which we did. And it was symbolic of goodbye, Dad. We had a metal bow, so it was all quite safe. Don't worry. Metal bow, long matches, and she lit the paper. We watched it burn in the metal thing, and then she tipped it and stood at the end of my terrace and tipped it into the canal. And those little ashes fluttered down into the canal. And she said, "Goodbye, Dad." So was that too woo-woo? That was my question. Should coaches do things like that? I think some coaches would be shocked.
Yeah.
No, gosh, what on earth were you doing? But it felt to me like that was the thing to do. So it's those kinds of questions. And then, was I being exploited by a client? I mean, this is one of the most peculiar things that has ever happened. A client who contacted me, I'd never heard of her. I couldn't track it. I couldn't find out anything about her. I thought, this is a security risk. I don't want her coming here. I met her at the British Library in the cafe there. Not something I advocate as a general rule, because it's a public space. And this woman arrived wearing a very oversized black blazer, dark kinds of glasses that go dark if it's too light.
Mm.
What was obviously a wig, like a Claudia Winkleman wig, black wig, big long fringe down here. She gave me, I think, a fake name. And she told me the most extraordinary story of scams, deceits, things that she had done that were morally wrong. And said she found it useful, and she wanted to tell somebody, and that she would like another session. I didn't say anything about that. I thought afterwards, no way I'm going to see her again. Then the email address disappeared. The phone number turned out not to be in use. She never paid my invoice. So, as well as all the other thefts that she had described, she stole my time. Why? It's so weird.
So covering a real range of extraordinary experiences from...
Well, some of them, I think coaches would think, oh, well, of course I do that. That's not weird at all. I do that all the time. Others would think, oh, my God, what on earth is she doing that? I think it's just intended as a way of looking at assessing what the risks are. What were the risks in whatever story I've told? What might the risks have been, and how you might decide.
So what I hear is fearless coaching as opposed to reckless coaching.
No, it's not about putting yourself in danger. Yeah. It's not. I mean, that story I've just told you is an example of. I'm very glad that woman did not come to my flat.
Yeah.
And once in the volunteer coaching I was doing, I'm not doing that particular thing anymore, but I live quite close to the headquarters of this charity, and as I left, not the client I'd seen last, but the penultimate client was waiting at the gates, and she followed me home. Fortunately, I knew all the back doubles, so I was able to shake her off. But why? So no, it's not about. It is about risk, but it's about assessing risk, and it's about against the risk is assessing what you would gain if you took that risk, and it's about not being too frightened to experiment, as long as there's no exploitation involved, which is a big caveat, of course. Yeah. What would exploitation look like?
Yeah. And you also mentioned in some of our written communication the other book that you have coming out called Your Time, and I wonder if
that's right. Well, this has been a very enjoyable book to write, and it's a book. It's a so-called trade book, meaning it'll be sold in bookshops, unlike coaching books, which you order online by and large. But it's aimed at women in midlife who feel. They may have young children. They may have parents who are getting old. Everybody is relying on them. They have no time for themselves. And they have questions about their career. They have questions about their health. Often they're feeling very stuck. They're feeling they have to, in quotes, stay in their jobs even though they don't like them. There may be questions about their mental health, about their physical health, menopause. Maybe questions about what am I doing anyway, questions about relationships. So I've got a chapter, for instance, called Better Arguments, on the assumption that it's impossible to avoid conflict. But how do you have a productive argument? And I'm using the word argument deliberately. It's not a discussion. How do you have an argument? So, yeah, it's got a lot of examples and from all the hundreds of women I've worked with over the years. So how, for instance, if you feel stuck in your career, are you really? What do you do to get out of the stuckness?
Mm. Yeah. Goodness, and there's a parallel with coaching, if ever there was one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So as we begin to move to a close, I wonder if there's anything we haven't covered that you'd like to, or any particular message that you might like to share.
Well, you mentioned the Go-Tom Masterclass, which is about developing a coaching business, and might it be worth spending a few minutes just on that?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. I think that, and you asked the question at the beginning of what the coaching market was like when I first started working as a coach. And it was very, very different in that there was, on the one hand, very little competition, no training, no supervision, no help of any kind, really, no colleagues. But on the other hand, because there wasn't that help, there wasn't the help to answer the kinds of questions you might be going to talk about now. What do you do to develop your practice? And at the time, I think the assumption was anybody could coach anybody on anything. And do you know the Coaches Training Institute in California?
I do.
Coactive coaching. So at the time, I think that was, may not be the philosophy now, but at the time that was literally the first training course. They came to the UK, and I went on their first UK ever training course, which is just 2 days. Very useful. And I think that was very much their philosophy, that coaching was so universal. The questions you asked were so neutral, so lacking in context that you needn't know anything about the client's background, about the organization they were working in, about the needs of their professional body, because it didn't matter. You could just ask those nice neutral questions and it would all be fine. And perhaps at the time it was, but it's not now. So now, because there are tens of thousands of coaches, it's a very, very saturated market. You have to think very differently about what you do. So one of the things that's changed is that coaching now always has an adjective attached to it. Career coaching, life coaching, relationship coaching, parent coaching, debt coaching, which explains what kind of coaching the person does. So I think the best advice really for somebody starting out is to think about what is your niche. Where are you credible? Who do you really like working with? What problems that those people have do you enjoy discussing? And the answers to that will probably tell you where your market is. Particularly, where are you credible? So it shouldn't matter how much you know about their market, just as those coaches training people were implying all those years ago. But in practice, it does.
And is that from a business building perspective? But what I'm hearing, or at least perhaps inferring, is that once you have the client, it's not about, say, imparting knowledge on a particular set of like on a particular focus, but rather this is a way of building up a client base that can then lead to the word of mouth.
Well, that's certainly true, but I think you really do need to know how that client's profession functions. So, for instance, if you're working with a law firm, you need to know what the difference is between a senior partner, an equity partner, and an associate, and just a straight partner. And you need to know what the career stages are that are associated with that, and how people progress from one of those levels to the next if they want to. And then what is required if they do want to make that leap, for instance, to partner, what kind of process they will have to go through. Because if you don't know it, the client will have to explain it to you. And it's much better if you do already know that, and you know all the jargon that's associated with it. And you know the kind of different pressures that are put on people for fee earning at those different levels. And also what kinds of specialisms there are likely to be in each firm. How much it matters that people have a specialism. Sometimes it's a very small firm, it may not matter at all. But the bigger the firm, the more the specialism will matter. So I think you do really, and you can acquire that just by working with those people. Sometimes if your first time you work with a law firm, they'll be very merciful and they'll explain it to you. But it's better if they don't have to.
And in your view, what is the most effective route to landing that first client in an industry where perhaps you don't have operational experience? So I've heard you say that you do a good amount of work within law, and as far as I understand it, you have never been a lawyer or worked in a law firm.
No, I haven't. No.
So how do you get from the 0 to 1 to start building?
Well, it's all through personal recommendation. So somebody who you have worked with, who may have a best friend or a partner, personal partner. So let's say your original client is a doctor because you're acceptable in the health service. But let's say they are married to somebody who is a partner in a law firm. That would be very unusual because it's usually doctors married to doctors or to nurses. But it can happen that because they met at university or something, they come from a different profession. So you do good work with that doctor, and they talk about the work to their partner, and the partner thinks, oh, that sounds quite useful. And then if they're quite senior, they know of somebody maybe in their team who could do with the kind of help you are giving to their husband or wife. Yeah. And so then they mention you. Now, what's become more difficult about that is that HR people are taking a much more intrusive interest in who operates as coaches. And many of them have done coach training themselves. So it's not so easy to pull the wool over their eyes as it might have been 20 years ago. And they have their favorites. So they may ask you to go through an assessment or put you through some kind of selection process. But I think that's still how it happens. It's all really through personal recommendation, or they may be looking for somebody who has a particular specialism that happens to be your specialism. But they'll only know about you if they've heard about you through somebody who's directly or one move away work with you.
Yes, the buyer is far more educated than they may have been.
Much more, and they're choosing much more skillfully than they ever used to, and they're much better at interrogating the potential client about what they need than they ever used to be. So the matching process is much better than it used to be. It was very haphazard, and it isn't now.
A question I'm frequently asked, which I don't know that it's a good question even as I begin to form it, but I'm going to ask you anyway and see where we go, is how long does it take to build a practice? Because you have the vantage of multiple decades in the industry, and I trust working with people at all stages over the course of that. So if you were to give a broad brushstroke as regards building a practice sufficient to meet a 2-day-a-week job that's bringing in a full-time equivalent of £50,000 a year, let's say, how long? How many months, years?
Oh gosh, I think it all depends, but I think on average it's 18 months, really. And assuming that you will spend your first few months on business development. Just see it as any other kind of small business. You probably wouldn't go into any business just straight thinking, oh, I want to be a hairdresser. I'll do some training and then I'll just open a shop. You wouldn't. Well, perhaps you would, but I think you're unwise to do that. You would look at the competition. You would look at what your costs were likely to be. You would ask yourself, who are my natural customers? How should I segment them? I mean, you said I've worked with people at all stages. I haven't really. I have, in fact, always worked at the most senior levels, really. Other than in my volunteer work, where I have worked with very disadvantaged women. But again, they come from all kinds of backgrounds. You can be disadvantaged with a PhD. But if you've got it in Ukraine, it's not going to be much help to you here. So I think you should assume 18 months really to get to that point. And I think 2 days a week earning 50K is very realizable. And during that time, what you should do is make sure you have supervision, that you get more training, having decided what your niche is, make sure you know you're fully aware of what all the up-to-date approaches are and whatever your niche is. What are other people doing? What are your competitors doing? The one of the nice things about coaching is people are very generous with their knowledge. They don't hug what they, by and large, don't hug what they know. Because we all know that somebody who's a competitor today could be a collaborator tomorrow.
Yeah. And it brings to mind the way in which you describe the sales process in building a coaching business, that also that is a collaborative win-win situation.
Absolutely. It's not really about selling in the traditional sense at all. It's about a facilitative process where you are investigating what that client needs, and you're prepared right from the start to say, this isn't the right client for me, or I am not the right coach for you. It's about uncovering what that client needs. So it's not a hunter and prey kind of process at all. I think a lot of selling also isn't like that anymore anyway, except in some sectors. It still is, unfortunately, but it's if you're not working to client need, you can't be you're not the right coach for them anyway. So I think that approach to selling takes a lot of the heat out of it, a lot of the dread out of it. Oh, I don't know how to sell myself. I don't know how to say what I would charge. And then people start too low, and then 2 years later they're drowning in rage and resentment. Why are my clients paying more?
And what else, as regards building a coaching practice, that we haven't covered that it's useful to include?
I think we probably have covered it. I think if I summarize it, I would say let's say you finish your training, you get your qualification, you're still only at the beginning. You really have to do two things in parallel. You have to improve the way you coach by getting practice clients that probably either pay you just some nominal amount or don't pay. But they still give you feedback and they will be prepared to recommend you. You can still talk about them. It doesn't matter. Nobody know whether they paid you or not. And you get more training. Your aim is to get very much better to increase the effectiveness of what you do and your confidence by 100%. And as part of that, you you have a supervisor who will help you. And you bring those practice clients to him or her and you discuss them. And the supervisor is, in effect, at that stage, an extension of your training. And a lot of people don't do that. They say, I'm not earning any money, I can't afford it. I think that's a false economy, personally.
Hmm.
And at the same time, you're doing that business process, and you're contacting everybody you know. You've made yourself an enormous spreadsheet or network, everybody you've ever met on a course, former colleagues, people you university with, your friends, your family, and you approach anybody who could help you by doing a so-called research interview, where you were not saying, please hire me. You are asking, in your organization, what happens about coaching? Who gets coaching? And you probably coaches now, what kinds of backgrounds do they have? And what problems are facing this organization in the future? What might that mean for the kind of coach you hire? And what you're hoping to hear is, oh, people just like you. So you've taken the heat out of the conversation by not appearing to ask for work. All you're doing is, and it's so valuable, you're getting intelligence about the whole world of coaching as that organization sees it, including what they pay. So this will help you when you're asking those questions, think, well, they're hiring people just like me. My kind of background, my kind of training, the problems people have or the kinds of problems I like working on. I am their kind of person. So what you're doing in that conversation is demonstrating that you are. So next time they need somebody and they can't resource it from the coaches they already know, the chances are they will come to you. Not immediately, but they will come to you. And then you stay in touch with that person. You write them a nice email afterwards thanking them. And then you stay in touch, regular intervals, reminding yourself. That's how it happens.
And it's back to the importance of the relationships. And
yes, but it's also back to confidence and believing that you have something you can offer and knowing that you do. And being able to talk about your work in ways that are convincing. Because in those research interviews, about 2/3 of the way through, the HR person will turn to you and say, oh, well, so Neil, how about you? What do you do? Tell me about you. And so you have a little potted biog ready. And you don't lumber them with your CV at that point. You send it to them later. And it's not a CV. It's a biog. And then you wait for something to come up. So that's why just doing it with people you already know or the organization you've already left, they've probably already fielded you, everybody they can think of. So that's why I need to broaden it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you so much for not only your generosity with your time today, but also, as we touched in on earlier, your generosity of what you bring to the industry through your writing and sharing in different ways of your wisdom and experience.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, Robbie here, creator of The Coach's Journey, and just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. If you loved this episode, I think you'll love my free ebook, An Introduction to the Coaching Business Flywheel, which you can get at thecoachesjourney.com. It's my attempt to boil everything I've learned from my years supporting, coaching, and interviewing coaches about their businesses into one simple model containing the fundamentals of any sustainable coaching business. These are the only things you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business, and the things that if you don't do them, you can't have a sustainable coaching business. You can get it for free at thecoachesjourney.com. You can also work with me as your coach. I love the work I do with coaches, supporting them to have sustainable coaching businesses, to build their businesses in honorable ways, to have more impact with their clients, and much, much more. You can find out about my group coaching for coaches at thecoachesjourney.com, or reach out to me directly via robbieswale.com to speak to me about one-to-one coaching. I work with max 2 coaches at one time in a kind of apprenticeship model. So thanks so much to everyone who's supported the Coach's Journey over the years, but in particular, thank you to Alex Whitten, Alan Bedding, Christina Matai, Helen Gamble, Jessica Jem, Nikki Marsden, Rachel Crawford and Rebecca Nosko for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.